do you have dyslexia? Do you have autism? They're quite general, but I think most people with Tourette's will know they have it or not.
I'm happy to go first.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, I'm very brave. I'm here because I am the strategic lead for preparing for adulthood and autism in a local authority. And I'm sorry, I got my granddaughter with me. Sorry, she just woke up. And I do work with young people with all, I will say, NES, CND. And I find that when they have a diagnosis of Tourette, we actually don't know what to do. It's not out there information. We don't have groups. My title, as it says, I'm the lead in autism, but we don't have anyone that is the lead in Tourette. So I have taken myself to actually become more aware and know more. So when we go to those panels, those meetings, I know what to do next. So I know what we really are talking about. So that's me.
Thank you. That's really interesting. And this will definitely give you a little bit extra awareness on understanding what exactly is Tourette's, and when you get diagnosed, how do they come to that conclusion? I know very little about it, and what I know is from Pete in Big Brother. Oh, classic series. But yeah, those of you who do not know, I'm Nat, and I am the head of community at Exceptional Individuals. We are a neurodiversity employment partnership, which essentially means we support people who come under the neurodiversity umbrella, which is like dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, OCD, Tourette's. As you may have guessed, I'm also neurodiverse. So I have autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, and OCD. So it's why the pronunciations might not always be completely there, but you get the gist. If you haven't heard of Exceptional Individuals, we're one of the only people who are doing what we're doing in the UK and even the world, I think. It's not a recruitment agency as such. It's more about supporting people who are neurodiverse every step of the journey. So from upskilling themselves to finding inclusive employment, to supporting people in the workplace, and eventually helping other organizations recruit more diverse talent. And as mentioned, what makes us really interesting is that 80% of our team are neurodiverse. So we're experts by experience, which is quite a nice, rare thing to have. So today is like, do I have Tourette syndrome? This isn't about diagnosing you, but this is more about asking yourself, do you have the characteristics and traits that are associated with Tourette syndrome? And if so, would it be wise to seek further attention, learn more about it? So think of this as like a starting point to a conversation. So the first thing is how the NHS defines it, is that tics are fast, repetitive muscle movements that result in sudden and difficult to control body joints or sounds. And tics repeatedly is what makes up Tourette syndrome. Now, there is a lot of misinformation about Tourette's. And like one of you, Nick, you mentioned that the only example you know of it is from Big Brother. And yeah, Pete did have Tourette's, but he had a very, very rare type of Tourette's. The vast majority do not swear. That's just such a tiny, tiny percentage of Tourette's sufferers or people who live with Tourette's have. It's mostly about tics, which are like involuntary movements. The best way I explain Tourette's to people or tics is that think when you got hiccups, right? You know you've got hiccups, you're very aware of the hiccups, but you can't stop them. They happen whether you like it or not. Some days they might be worse than others. Other days they might not be noticeable or might not even be there at all. But it's something which it's a reaction of your body and you're not able to help it. So hopefully we use that as a starting point to come to grips about what we're referring to when we're referring to tics. Because I will mention that term quite a lot throughout. So remember, it's about the body moving kind of when you didn't ask it to, repeatedly. So the first question I want to ask you all, but do you have any of the following or believe you may have? So if you think you might have ADHD, a learning condition, autism, and the reason I ask this is that with Tourette's, it's really common to have it as a co-occurring condition. Oh, that's nice. One for everything. So a co-occurring condition is something which goes at the same time. So maybe you've got dyslexia and dyspraxia, autism and ADHD. Tourette's is mostly common as companion to, say, autism, OCD. They interlink really, really closely. April says, I chose learning difficulty because I thought it was the closest one to autism. No, thanks for that. The reason I put OCD and ADHD as the only one to choose from, as they tend to be the highest co-occurring conditions to Tourette's. So always bear in mind that if you have ADHD or OCD, the likelihood is that you will have a lot of characteristics to Tourette's. How to get a diagnosis or what is the difference is, it's quite a nuanced thing, but hopefully we'll be tackling it or mentioning a few of them. So Nick says he thinks he has dyspraxia. And yeah, dyspraxia again is really common, but it's quite different from ADHD and OCD, but it's all one big umbrella. So I wouldn't be surprised if you have it, or if you have some of the characteristics. Because remember that it's not simply as like an off-on switch, you have it or you do not have it. It's normally on kind of like a continuum. And some people will have more characteristics than others. And if you have too many of them, that's when there might be challenges in life which are kind of hard to maneuver. But if you only have a few, life is perfectly, there's no challenges as such that hold you from doing what you're doing. But certain days, for example, could be more challenging. So try not to think of it as one size fits all. It's very unique for the individual. Sean says, I don't have a diagnosis of any of them, but my sister has OCD, and the doctor considered it might be a different neurological response to the same genetic disposition. Absolutely. So what you're meaning by that, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that sometimes our brains react in a different way. So I have autism, but I also have OCD. Now, whether or not they're two separate conditions, or whether it's more likely that it's just the symptoms of having a neurological difference displaying itself in different forms, depending on the strains of life that I'm going through, a lot of it is up for debate. Okay, that's really useful. The next one is physical tics. So these are the most common tics. So blinking would be when, obviously, we all blink. But if you're someone who just, blinks extra fast or more regular than you would imagine, and a lot of these do not expect them to happen all the time. They're normally exacerbated through certain scenarios. So maybe you're extra stressed or you're tired. There's a lot on your mind. These are when tics normally go over and above. So I see a lot of you blinking, whether or not you feel that it's excessive blinking or if it's just everyday blinking, who knows. Eye rolling, less common, but more noticeable. Grimacing, which to be honest is a word that I didn't know until I started doing this research, is essentially just when you make you kind of screw your face up like that. And shoulder shrugging, there's many, many more, but these are just the most common. And to be diagnosed with Tourette's, you really don't have to have all of them or any of them. It's normally one or a variation of it. Saad said, in fact, my son has all of those. Oh, that's interesting. So, yeah, you can have all of them. But again, with Tourette's and a tic is a involuntary movement. So you'd be blinking without your conscious awareness. You'd be rolling your eyes, making a face, or shrugging your shoulders without intentionally doing it. You might be aware of it, but not intentionally doing it because it's your choice. With Tourette's, it's normally that you can absolutely not do something, but think of it like an itch, that if you don't scratch it, it's going to really, really bother you. So it's kind of involuntary, but not really, because you really want to get rid of that sensation. Oh, it says, but they all appear at different stages. That's interesting. Here's the next selection of the most common ones. So we've got people who jerk their heads, might do really rapid movements that kind of look like whiplash. People who might just hop about, and how this reacts, it sometimes, a lot of these will relate to autism as well. Twirling, moving around, or kind of like just kind of touching people's face or being like really touchy-feely. For myself, there's like certain like poles in the garden or things in the house and the banisters, and whenever I go past them, I just have to touch them. Whether or not that's kind of related to Tourette's, I don't know, but maybe it's, sometimes I put it down to superstition, good luck, or it just kind of feels right. Or maybe when you're walking along the pavement and you see like little manhole covers and you have to touch them and stand on them, anything like that, hopefully you're starting to see how Tourette's and OCD are very closely linked. OCD is obsessive compulsive disorder, but it's more of a like mental way of processing. So in your head, you might have to do something, but Tourette's is more a physical manifestation of those compulsive thoughts. Like you need to act on it. So these are all the physical ones that we've talked about. Obviously, there's more, but these are the ones that will be most common or most kind of people pick up on. A lot of these are very like tiny. So when you think of Tourette's, do not expect someone to be like, moving all over the place. It could just be like, a little twitch or the ear or the nose. It could be something so small. It doesn't have to be over the top appearances. All right, now for vocal. So sometimes it's not just through physical movements. It can also be from compulsive vocal. And the most common ones is grunting. So think of it, when people like playing tennis, like that, or when they're always sound like they're trying to clear their throat, but there's nothing in the throat. And you're like, and you're like, I don't need to do it, but you do it anyway. Whistling. Like, don't get me wrong, we all love a good whistle, but if there's like a certain whistle or a certain tune that you do all the time, and again, a lot of these can kind of overlap into OCD. They also overlap into ASD, autism spectrum disorder, really heavily. You might have coughing or tongue clicking. And excuse me for my gifs. I know they could be seen as insensitive, but I thought it's far better to kind of make this a bit more lighthearted than just do really boring images. So that was my rationale for picking these ones. But with tongue clicking, it's more like, when you kind of like that, that's the most kind of common image of Tourette's. Oh yeah, still got you there, April. Good. Okay. So at the moment, we've got most common here is grunting and clearing throat. From the people we work with, I would say, the grunting is the most common one. And when we think of Tourette's, obviously a lot of people think of swearing, which isn't correct, but swearing and grunts is a similar thing. The reason we do it is that it kind of releases chemicals in your brain, which kind of gives you like a relief. And just like when you stub your toe and you hurt yourself, you might let out some obscenity, like some swear words. We do that because it helps lower our stress or increases our stress tolerance. Now, grunting, clearing your throat, whistling, it does the same sort of thing. Imagine every time you did an act, someone rewarded you with, say, a lollipop. You'll start doing the act more and more. For those with Tourette's, by fulfilling these compulsions, it kind of gives the body some relief. And the alternative is not to do it is far worse than the relief that you get from doing it. Oh, Eva, I love the gifts. That's good. So my next section of vocal tics. What was the last song you got stuck in your head / keep whistling? So think of like those songs that just can't get out of your head and you say all the time. I had a parrot that just came up, up, up to the sky. I don't know where it learned that from, but it just kept on doing it. Or I know someone with Tourette's who loves saying Thundercats. I think it must have been a show in the like 80s or something, but it doesn't mean that they overly like the song, but they just stick to it. So we've got I Can't Remember, Sex Bomb, classic. Who doesn't love the Jones? Playdays theme tune. Nice. Do you know the song I got stuck in my head recently? Was it a song about a fish? Like all the kids keep singing it. Is it a bluefish? Yeah, I think you know.
I just wrote it down, Baby Shark.
Yeah.
I'm all day singing that. And you know what? I'm an old woman here with a proper job, and I am in meetings and I actually have been told a couple of times, Eva, we can hear you. And I'm like, oh, sorry, when we are waiting. And it's because my granddaughter loves that in YouTube, and I got it all the time downstairs. Oh my God, it's crazy. Please do not go and check. It's a horrible song, but
No,
it's stuck, yeah, forever.
I only learned about it a few weeks ago when I went to go visit my godson, and
Lucky you.
they was very shocked I never heard of it before. For those of you who haven't heard of it, check it out at your own peril. It really is very addictive. But as you can guess, all of us get songs stuck in our head, whether we have Tourette's or whether we have characteristics of tics or not. We all get songs stuck in our head. But with kind of Tourette syndrome, it can be like when a song, a tune, a sound of any sort can kind of get like rung in the brain. And every time the brain kind of relays it, it gets a boost. And it's like, yeah, okay, that's what I needed. And I don't want to compare it too much to drugs, but there is a relation that people take drugs because it makes them feel amazing. But then the next time doesn't feel as good. And the next time, not as good. So you might have to do it more. And this is why sometimes with Tourette's, depending on what you're going through in your life, your tics can get more and more regular and severe. Someone put some TikTok song. Yeah, TikTok is I've not kind of ventured down that rabbit hole yet, thankfully. Oh, April said, I was listening to Popmaster on BBC Radio 2 earlier this week, and there was a question about a song called Help, I'm a Fish. It goes, I'm a little yellow fish in the deep blue sea. Nice. It's always the songs you don't really like that get stuck in your head as well, which I noticed. So the next one, in terms of, and all of these questions, by the way, were taken from some of the official ways that Tourette's is diagnosed. Bear in mind, it isn't one size fits all. There's multiple different ways, but these are all the ones that kind of overlapped. So they are taken from sources, which I can give you if you want them. So this one is, do you currently have a favorite word? And if so, what? And, maybe you used to have them more as a child, but, it could be like exceptional or aphrodisiac or tunip. They're like maybe words that it might sound completely random, but you just like the sound of it. It sounds good in your head. Oopsie doopsie. I like that one. I just thought of a tune that I couldn't get out of my head recently. Soul Bossa Nova by Quincy Jones. I'm trying to think what a word that I normally get stuck in my head. I think we'll get onto this question a bit later, but I go through phases. There should be words that I just like the sound. Normally they're like really long words, or hello, yeah. Normally they're sounds rather than actual words. But as you can see, with Tourette's, it's not limited to a song or a word or a movement. It's any sort of bodily movement which you kind of get stuck in the groove of doing. So it could be, kind of like touching something all the time, saying something, making a sound, a sensation. Yeah, baby, oopa, oopa. So it really could be anything. And this is why onomatopoeia, is that on a Greek word? So when people ask you, like, oh, isn't Tourette's just about swearing? No, but why do some people swear? It's just because in terms of the word that kind of gets stuck in the brain on repeat, that word, sound, movement, it really can be anything. Whatever gives the brain like a kick. And if there's certain words which, maybe they get a reaction, maybe they're like, if you swear, for instance, it's like, it does kind of surprise people. If someone say oopsie or onomatopoeia or yeah, it has to be a word which triggers the brain somehow. So this is how we get to where we are today, where if you think about how many words, songs, movements there are in mankind, of course, curse words are only a very, very, very small fraction. So it makes sense why when in Tourette's, that the amount of people who get stuck on those words in repeat is very small. So hopefully that gives you some context about why we get stuck on certain words, certain phrases than others. Okay, Eva, help on the fish. Yeah, I know that one too, April. Nice. I'm gonna have to check that one out. All right, here's a nice little one of Pingu. So this one is surprisingly common. Sometimes they're not even words, they're animal sounds. So do either yourself or people you work with, do you kind of like just like saying sounds? For me, I love saying meow, meow. You know, I love doing cat sounds. I'm not ashamed of it. And you know, my friends and family have grew to love it. But you know, it does come off strange to the outside world, but it's something which, you know, gives me kind of like a sigh of relief. I must say, it's better saying woof woof or meow than it is saying, you know, beep. When I'm like doing it, it's not making fun of it. It's kind of appreciating that it feels good. And it's the reason why it does it. Again, every time that sound is kind of repeated or executed, the brain is rewarded for it. So can you stop it? Well, you can, but it takes a long time. Normally with like things like OCD, what it does is the brain kind of gets like locked on something, and it's not so easy to unlock it, but it can be easier to lock it onto something else. But the thing you secondary lock it on, hopefully should be less damaging if it is damaging. So for instance, you might have a thing where you like end up like pulling your hair out, and that's not good. Now, to get rid of the sensation at all is quite difficult, and you know, might need medication or you might need a lot of training. Or, but what can be an easier thing is, okay, maybe you have like elastic band around your wrist that you just pinch, and that just kind of transfers the compulsion. So you might not be able to get rid of it easily, but you might be able to transfer it onto something which is less distracting or less harmful. Nick says, I have a friend who does Chewbacca. I like that. That's great. And the thing is, they can be funny, but you've got to be careful not to laugh all the time, because remember, this is something that people with Tourette's syndrome can't help. So, you know, yeah, you know, they might laugh of it because they might feel a little bit awkward about it in certain situations. But the best thing you can do is just ignore it. Because this, you know, if I commented every time you blinked, or, you know, every time you like cracked a rib or arm or something that everyone does every day, if I commented every time you did it, it's going to get really annoying. Or have you ever had anyone says, you're really short, you know that, or you're really tall, and you're like, yeah, I know, you think no one's ever told me before in my entire life. And that's exactly how it is. It might be a novelty to you or for the other people observing it, but for the person who is doing it, it's not a novelty. It's everyday life. April said, I used to think involuntary swearing was a common trait in all people with Tourette's until I learned that not all people do this. When a man with it worked at EI for a short time 2 years ago, he did a presentation about the experience with Tourette's. Thanks, April. And you know what? We all think that. We all think it's about swearing. Why? Well, that's because when you look at the most notable causes, or the people who stand out the most, it would be swearing, because society doesn't like that. So it what sticks out. And when we looked at like Big Brother, I think it was season 6 or something, the person was a really great character and he did do it. But if you go back and watch it, you realize he did a lot more tics than just swearing. A lot of it was just kind of like jolts or movements. A colleague who April was talking about would do a lot of like kind of like clickings. And if anything, sometimes that can be more challenging because it's harder, it's more challenging to explain. All right, we'll move along from Pingu. All right, so grimacing, and hopefully I pronounced that right, is facial expressions. Whose expression do you like the most? So I think we got Pink, Bill Clinton. Is it Andy Murray? Or I don't want to make sure I got the right one. And then Kumez. Yeah. To be honest, I don't think she's pulling much of a face, to be honest. But it's quite a common one. So like just screw up your face and make different shapes. And people say, oh, stop pulling that face. And it's the same sensation as saying something, you know, by doing a certain movement, you know, I like got really stretchy skin and I like kind of like playing with it. Or, you know, maybe you got someone who can like do the eyebrow thing where they can move the eyebrow really high. And we all like, you know, kind of moving our face. But sometimes it happens so involuntary. Like all these people, these, I don't think of Pink, to be honest. I think she's doing that on purpose. But for like the tennis player or the politician, they look like quite a natural thing. And though they're not overly embarrassing compared to the situation they find themselves in, most people accept that tennis players will pull unusual faces, or politicians are so used to lying. They've got so many facial expressions in their face in order to pull off any sort of lie. But it fits in. But if you're in a situation where it just doesn't seem appropriate, that's when people may notice. So remember, Tourette's isn't just about vocal, isn't just about like movements. It can also be facial expressions or anything in between. Andy Murray. Okay, thank you. I think Pink has the most grimacing face in those pics. It's the most cringeworthy, definitely. He says, my son's friend during secondary school had Tourette's and swearing was his thing. However, he had lost a lot of those other tics. Yeah, and tics can change because it kind of what the brain gets focused on. Sometimes with a lot of training, you can kind of like move the kind of like the lock onto something. Other times you might have the same tic for a lifetime. Maybe someone learned something like from Power Rangers when they were a child, like whoop, and then even in their like late 70s, they're still doing the same thing, and it's just become such a pattern. When like a fly flies in your face, you blink to stop it, or you kind of like you automatically kind of do something. That's the same. The brain gets so used to kind of fulfilling that circuit that the more times you complete a circuit, the stronger the connections come, and this is why it can get very difficult to kind of like stop it, especially the longer it goes on. Bill Clinton, definitely. I agree with Nick. Bill Clinton. Yeah. I can't really I always look like a blobfish. Those little kind of like really sad fish. No, I try to do that. Do the most expressive face you can possibly do.
I'm just thinking that what I keep doing every day, obviously, is the one that I go to my my granddaughter is only 6 months and live with me. And with COVID, I am with her all day. So I spend all day. I love April's face when she put that face, but I am all day with my granddaughter because I want her to put the tongue out to me, which is completely inappropriate. But I love it.
Yeah, well, that's a really good point. When we are with children, we do tend to do like the weirdest faces.
And I got video to prove it, Nat. So probably I should send you a couple.
And I think with children or like babies, it is a really good example because we kind of do it without really thinking because we just think, that's what the babies want to see. No one's bothered asking them. And that's the thing with Tourette syndrome. It's just very natural. Excuse my language, but you must have heard the term resting bitch face. And it's not a great phrase, but it just means when like people always look angry, but that's just like their natural face and they can't help it. Some people always look really happy, even if they're not. And with Tourette syndrome, sometimes the face will naturally do to like, the eyes, they might purposely kind of like make them go far apart, might do the eyebrow thing. And it's just kind of so embedded into that person's like day-to-day activities. Just because society has deemed what it considers normal or acceptable, depending on certain circumstances, doesn't mean that everyone's brains naturally follow those same patterns. Like, I'm sure you've seen like some horrible accidents, or like YouTube fails, and you laugh at them, and you feel really bad for laughing. But that's the natural reaction that your body gives you, or laughing at something inappropriate. It's the same with Tourette syndrome. Yes, that kind of reaction might not be deemed appropriate by society standards. That doesn't mean that's not like the default for that person. Sometimes it's very difficult with neurodiversity to separate what is right and wrong and what is right and wrong because as a society we've created that logic. It's always worth to kind of take a step back and ask yourself, is there anything inherently wrong with this? Is this inherently damaging? If not, then let it be. Okay, favorite texture to touch. And this is another one which a lot of people do not realize that this does relate to Tourette syndrome. So do you like kind of the rough texture, might be like sandpaper or rock, bumpy, this could be like gravel. On this picture, you got like kind of the bumps on a pumpkin. Smooth could be like a tile, silky, fabric, soft, a pillow, a cotton bud, anything like that. And if yes, I'm going to be starting to repeat myself a lot, but to really hit home the fact that Tourette's and OCD is about kind of the brain kind of getting reassurance, comfort, or relief from a sensation. That sensation can be movement, it can be vocal, but it can also be touching. So, kind of like always touching the same fabric, ruffling your hand on a carpet. This is why one of the things that some people get to support them with, say, ADHD, Tourette, etc., are like fidget toys or sensory things where they can like touch and pull. And it just kind of like certain textures. We all have, like, if you look here, it's quite varied. We all have different preferences to like the sensations we enjoy. Some of us like rock music, others like classical, some of us like the soft sensation, others like things with a bit of friction. It really depends on an individual. And Tourette's is the physical or vocal manifestation of these kind of like desires. But sometimes they become so big that you can't help but act on them. I think we'll always have times where there's someone where we just want to shout at or something, oh, I really want to touch that in a museum, but you shouldn't, and you're able to hold back. Imagine like with Tourette's is something that you can't do. I like with hiccups, like, okay, I have the feeling I want to hiccup, but I'm just going to keep it at bay. But we all know that that's not a thing. Or when you want to sneeze, you can try your best to hold it in, and you might be able to like kind of do a mini sneeze, but sooner or later, that big sneeze is going to come out. So these are not a perfect analogy for Tourette's, but hopefully gives you some idea to understanding not just the thing that we all see, but the reasoning kind of like under the surface. So now we've gotten on to the swearing. I had to include it because this is one of the biggest misconceptions, but remember, it's hardly even related to Tourette's, like only a very, very small percent. So what swear word do you use the most? And you know what? I'm not going to say them. So we've got the F-bomb, the S-bomb, the C-bomb, or another C-bomb. And if you don't know what they are, well, good for you. But I'm going to let you know a bit more about the science of swearing, because I think it's really interesting and it might really help you understand why people who do swear compulsively are unable to stop, or why the brains would even pick that up to begin with. Because I know when I was learning about it, it really doesn't make much sense. Well, you could say any word. If you're choosing to use a word which is deemed bad, that's your choice. I don't see how this is something that you can't help. That was always my thinking. But when you understand the science of swearing, it starts to make a lot more sense. So swear words have always existed, and they're words which we use when we have a real condensed amount of feelings. So say you stump your toe. If you swear, it's a good word which think of it like a natural painkiller. We say like, oh, when you hurt yourself, because it does bring down the pain tolerance. I don't know the science completely for that, but it's been proven in many, many studies. If two people who hurt themselves of equal amount, if one was to swear, they would feel less pain when doing like a pain survey. And it could be any words that you use. And because those words on themselves do not have power, that they're powerless. But because society has deemed these words offensive, they do pack a more of a punch. So when you say them, you feel like you're kind of being a bit naughty, and the brain kind of likes the feeling of kind of like unleashing itself, and thus can bring down like your pain. So imagine though you've got Tourette's, and when you say certain words or phrases, it stops that kind of like internal itch in your head. Obviously, you'll pick words which react more heavily, and swear words are a prime candidate just because they are the forbidden fruit. But remember, Tourette's is involuntary. So if you're, say, in a classroom and you shout, oh, beep, This isn't because, yes, you might be doing it subconsciously because you know it is a bad word or it feels good to say, but just because your brain knows it doesn't mean you have the choice whether or not to say it or not. This is why it really isn't a sign of rebellion or a sign of like disregarding or going against the status quo. It's very much a subconscious thing, but that's the reason why the brain does gravitate towards abrasive words. But I really can't hit home enough. It is the very, very minimal amount of Tourette's overall. When it comes to like tics and movements, it's not that they get a buzz out of the rest of the world reacting, it's that their body enjoys it. So it's far more of a personal thing than it is about reactions from the outside world. Sorry, I know that's a bit complicated, but I hope you get the gist of why some people do use those words. And it's just because the brain gets more of a stimulus out of it. Now, this one we can do. We talked about random words that you like to say, but do you have any really creative words of using instead of swearing? Like dingbat, darn it, fudge, honey iced tea, any words that you might use that will give you the same kind of subconscious buzz of swearing without actually offending everyone around you. Chip, fudge, sugar. Nice. It sounds like some sort of dessert we're making. And the reason why a lot of people use these words is that, again, you can trick the brain in getting the same kind of release just by kind of shifting the focus to something else. It's really, really difficult to get rid of a compulsion. It's possible, but I've yet to do it for my ones. But you can kind of like transition them to something which is less harmful. Depending on how severely Tourette's affects you, though, it might not always be possible. So you can't just say to someone who always swears, like, okay, can we try this word instead? It's whether or not the brain latches onto that new word. I will always get stuck with certain phrases, or like I'll watch a film and I'll keep repeating the quote continuously until a better phrase comes in. Or a song will be stuck in my head and I am not getting rid of that song until I find a song that's even catchier. So think of it like an arms race in your head for finding the thing that relieves that kind of like internal itch or that internal hiccup. That is one thing I can suggest. If you are with someone who is saying something or doing something which turns to be harmful to them or those around them, one of the best things I can do in the short term is to kind of find something they'll be able to hopefully replace it with. But you can't force these things. It's whether or not, the brain is a mysterious thing. All right, April said, when I was 16, I read a magazine called Pop World. One issue had a cut out dice that had alternatives to swear words on it, such as flob and tweeter. Nice. I do love creative words. One of the best creative swearers of all time is Shakespeare. Shakespeare made up all the words. The word bubble. Bubble's a great word. He made it up. What time of the day do your tics affect you the most? Tourette's isn't a continuum. It's not something which affects you every single second of the day. It can affect you at different times into greater severities. So on here, we've got most people said evenings or afternoon. And interestingly, I'm not surprised by that. And my assumption, and it's only assumption, would be that as the day goes on, the brain gets more tired. So it's more likely to kind of need that kind of stimulus. And in the morning, it's, fresh and relaxed. But there's also a strong correlation between stress, depression, anxiety. So the environment around you can heavily impact the frequency of your tics. So some people are more morning people, other afternoon, but there tends to be a peak in tics for the general population from afternoon onwards, which reflects in this very unscientific pool. So again, why is this useful? Because sometimes people with Tourette's are made to feel guilty or bad about themselves because people say, oh, well, you can help you earlier on. You could help it. You could keep it in your mouth then. I know. Oops, that wasn't what I meant to say. You can keep it in your head then when we're home alone. But the second we go out to like a restaurant, suddenly you can't control it. that's mean, you know, and if you have a better understanding that this can affect you in different circumstances, for, you know, maybe when you go to a restaurant, there is more pressure because you are already very anxious that there's people around you who are going to be witnessing and observing you. And say if you draw attention to yourself through one kind of tic, the likelihood is you'll continue to do it because you'll get more and more stressed and more self-aware. So the best thing you honestly can do is have the people you know and love just not acknowledge it. Remember, treat it like a blink or a hiccup. Do not laugh at it every time. It's a thing, move on. Sean said, mine are often worse when I'm rushed or under pressure. No, thanks for sharing that. And that really is a very common one. Neurodiversity is very much the same like that. You know, autism, dyslexia, ADHD, yes, it affects you your entire life, but sometimes you could go a few days, a few months, you know, you can go a really long time without having any negative characteristics from it. Some people might say, you know, I had dyslexia as a child, but I've not had it for years. And now I got this new job and now I'm really struggling. How? I thought I got over it. And it's not that you got over it, but different things can kind of like a new situation, a new environment can really, you know, kick it into your focus. So yes, this comes back to it. Do you currently feel any of these? And are you stressed, anxious, tiredness, or none of them? I'm pretty certain a lot of us will be able to resonate with one of these. And as Sean rightly mentioned, these really, you know, there is a heavy reliance. Even if you were to reduce all the stress in the world, they might still have tics. But you can definitely reduce how severe they are, or that tic, you know, like with sneezes. Sometimes the urge to sneeze is so unbearably strong, even if you find yourself at the wedding, at the part where people say, anyone have anything to say, you can't help yourself, you can't stop it. But there's other times where, you know, if it was quiet, you could quite happily sneeze, but you don't have to force it. You can hold it in if you want. And that relates. With tics, there's definitely, people can hold them in sometimes. But if you're holding something in, that can also add to stress. It's, you know, have you ever tried to hold in a yawn? You know, it hurts your jaw. It actually hurts because you're trying to hold something in, which is so natural. And that's the same with tics. There are people who can hold it in, but quite honestly, it's not worth it because you're just kind of bottling it up for later. April said, I felt tired yesterday because I got up at 6:30, so that could tidy up my flat a bit and take my rubbish and recycling out before the cleaner came at 9 a.m. I ended up having an afternoon nap. Yeah, you can just like wear yourself out so early. Sean, I feel more in control of some tics than others, but it is uncomfortable. No, thanks for sharing that. And it really is true. They are uncomfortable. It's something which, in an ideal world, you shouldn't have to hold in. You should be able to just express it. In the words of the great Shrek, better out than in, I always say. And the same really applies to Tourette's and tics. I use those words so many differently, by the way, because Tourette syndrome is something which is like a diagnosed condition, but you can still have tics even if you're not diagnosed. That's why I'll like use those words separately, but also sometimes, you know, interwovenly. So it's more politically correct to say, oh, someone is demonstrating tics, rather than saying, oh, they're demonstrating Tourette syndrome, because one is a diagnosis, one is the name of like the action. Do you experience any of these premonitory sensations? So you either on the scale here, you either say never experience it, or on the other side, all the time. This happens to me every day. So a tingly feeling before needing an itch, a burning feeling in the eyes before blinking, a dry throat before grunting, an itchy joint or muscle before jerking. And for you to be diagnosed with Tourette syndrome, you do not need all of everything I spoke about today. You really do not need all of them to be diagnosed. You only need a few of them, and normally you need to have it for 6 months plus, or a year. But the reason why, I don't know if it's working or not, but I'll go through them anyway. And all of these are examples of what it's like to have a tic built up in you, but are also actual tics that people genuinely do have. It's that feeling of like needing to itch, but knowing that you can't, or when your eyes are stinging from wearing contact lenses and you have to blink extra, like lots more. The outside world cannot see that tingly feeling. They don't know that you're burning inside. They can't feel your dryness or the itchiness, but you still feel the need to do that reaction. If someone told you not to blink, you could probably not blink, but your eyes would get drier and drier and the discomfort would grow and grow. So it's far better just to say, I accept you for you, blink away. Where do you feel most relaxed? Home sweet home, out and about, chilling with friends, or relaxed? I've never heard of that. And we all have our special place. So if you're finding, some days more than others, you're really struggling, find your special place. If you're at school, maybe you can get a teacher to have like a special room where you can relax. Sometimes there's like prayer rooms, which people can use to like relax in. Maybe sometimes just going out for some fresh air. Think of it like resetting the batteries. Sadly, most works haven't caught on with having beds in the offices, which I really hope they do one day. But just having somewhere where you can go. What activity can you completely lose yourself in? I mentioned this because it could be painting, baking, whatever. Because another great way to control tics is to lose yourself. So if your mind isn't busy enough, if you kind of like, for me, I love multitasking because multitasking allows me to kind of keep my brain so busy that my OCD is less noticeable. If you are, for instance, using a fidget spinner or you're kind of painting, you're also listening to an audiobook, you've got so many different senses coming into your brain that it can actually be quite calming because think of it, it doesn't give the brain enough kind of bandwidth in order to go off and do its own thing. Doesn't work for everyone, but it's definitely a technique you can do. So for me, the more sensory information I've got coming into me, the less likely my brain will wander. So we got cooking, reading comics, reading, watching films, playing video games, long baths. All of this is perfect. Lego building, I like that. And if any of you are in the workplace and are struggling with Tourette's or tics, find something which helps you relax. For me, I listen to music all the time with my headphones on. And, it sounds basic, but if whatever works for you, and if it helps you, it helps. Editing videos. I hope that's April. And the NHS again says many have tics for several months before growing out of them. So a tic does not necessarily mean you have Tourette's syndrome. And I cannot state this enough. So if there's anything I want you to take home today, it's that one, Tourette's isn't about swearing. It's one output, but a very small output for many. And also, we all have tics. We've demonstrated today, we all get songs stuck in our head. We all get sensations. We all get kind of like, that kind of shiver down our spines. That doesn't make you have Tourette's. Tourette's is having these for like 6 months to a year plus, and to the point that they start negatively impacting your life. That's what Tourette's is. It's not about someone saying, oh, you keep clicking or you keep singing the same song, you got Tourette's. No. So keep those two things in mind. That Tourette's is a long-term condition which affects people over months, years, and it can affect anything from vocal to physical to any other sensations in between. Now, yeah, so here is, if you have any tics, how long have they lasted? So if you answer no, they haven't lasted a year plus, you probably do not have Tourette's. If you have had them for a year plus, then you may. So yeah, if you've had it 3 years, I'm not here to diagnose you though, so do go to your GP if you want further information. But today was more about giving you some base knowledge in order to know, is it worth having a further dialogue about it? And to finish up with, if any of you do have Tourette's and in the UK and looking for support, exceptional individuals can support you. So we do it for free. We're a social enterprise. Doesn't cost a penny unless you're an organization. And we can get you support, training, equipment in the workplace. I'm not going to go into a lot of information, but drop us an email or give us a call and we can always talk into more information about it. Any last questions or forever hold your peace? Anything that you want clarification on? Any kind of comments that you want to mention or something you want the rest of us to know? Now is your time.
I just want to say thank you. It has been very interesting, very informative, and you are great. Sorry, I'm a trainer myself, so I have to tell you that you are absolutely great. Thank you.
Thanks very much. We've got, do you know how long the process of diagnosing takes on average? For assessments, I can't speak for Tourette's, but for like autism, they can take several hours, like 6 to 8 hours, depending. But the whole process to kind of like goes to the GP, get the diagnosis, it takes a long time. I'm not going to lie. It's something which the likelihood of you going private is a lot higher than a lot of other conditions. But that shouldn't deter you. It's still worth speaking to the GP. But do appreciate, due to COVID, the waiting list is considerably long. I am having difficulties getting diagnostic for my son. It is challenging. What I recommend is today, or we have quizzes on our website, or like kind of unofficial ones, do them and say, okay, all of these characteristics my son really has, they're affecting his life negatively in these ways. What can we do? Normally, they will not give you a diagnosis if it's just something you're living with. It normally has to be something which is impacting your life in a negative way, and that having a diagnosis will give added benefit. Sometimes, to be honest with you, the stress and anxiety of going through getting a diagnosis doesn't always equal the return you get through having a statement. For a lot of adults, I often say, what do you hope to gain by getting diagnosed? Because the amount of support you get in the workplace ideally shouldn't be any different if it's a quality employer. But as a child, there definitely is an advantage because there's certain support which just isn't available unless you have official diagnosis. But most schools should just give support anyway. Either I work in SEN and it helps if you have a diary with information about when, how, and so on. It's not easy, but worth it. Yeah, I think a diary is really good as well. When I was getting diagnosed for OCD, I had to have a journal. It was a terrible idea for me though, because I didn't want to be obsessed, but every time I was obsessed, I had to write it. And that just made me more hyper aware that I was obsessing. So it doesn't work for everyone, but for the people it does work for, it's a really good documentation tool. Nick said, thank you very much. I really enjoyed the session. I found out about the session while researching dyspraxia, which I recently came across and found I had many traits. Explains a lot. I think I'm looking forward to your dyspraxia session next month. No, please do come. And I'm so grateful for you all attending today. Sadly, Tourette's isn't as mainstream and isn't as popular in terms of the others, but it's something which does need to have awareness about. I have lived with tics for years, but found working from home during COVID and being on video calls, the facial tics are far more noticeable as people are looking at your face more directly than they do face to face. Would be interested to know if others have had the same. That's a really, really good point, because you're right, people are paying more attention, but maybe there's also a positive because you might not have to go on camera as long as the people understand why you may not want to. Thanks so much. Here's our details. Get in touch. We hold webinars just like this every single week on a Thursday at 12 in UK time, and they're on every subject related to neurodiversity. So I hope today was useful, and I've really enjoyed speaking about Tourette syndrome with you all. All right, bye all.